Okay. Hi there, everybody. I'm Gus Peterson. I'm the guy who's putting all of these interviews together. And today I got an interesting guest. His name is Paul Rapp, and he has some really interesting stories to tell about things. So who are you?
I'm an attorney, and in 1994 I was working for a big law firm in Albany that was doing a lot of work for Woodstock 94. I'd been a rock and roller in the 80s, spent most of the 80s touring, and then went to law school, and I'm with this firm, and all of a sudden they announced that the firm had been hired by Woodstock 94 to do governmental permitting work and environmental work, which were things I didn't do. And so all these kids and these other lawyers in the environmental group were going down to Saugerties to the site and getting all these permits. They're walking around the law firm with Woodstock 94 satin jackets, and I'm sitting in my office just doing boring legal work, Mr. Rock and Roll. I have nothing to do with the festival at all. And the work picked up and picked up and picked up, and they're getting ferry permits to go across the Hudson because people would park across the river. And then the day before the festival was supposed to start, on
Exactly.
Thursday.
That was Thursday?
It was the Thursday, yeah. Middle of the afternoon, the gates were open. They were letting the public come in with tickets. It hadn't started raining yet, and people were camping, and I think they had some local acts playing, and they were showing movies. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang, and it was Phil, who was the head of the group that was down at the site preparing for
With your law firm?
With my law firm, preparing for the festival to start. And he goes, "Rapp, drop what you're doing and go to the fax machine. There's something coming in for you. We've just been sued by the state of New York. They're seeking an injunction to shut down the festival because the festival's not supplying sign language interpreters on the stage." And I said, "Phil, that's nuts." He goes, "I know." He goes, "But go talk to Senator Dunn." Senator John Dunn was a senior partner at the firm, and he had been in the Reagan administration in the late 80s. And he goes, "Go talk to Senator Dunn. I think he knows something about the American with Disabilities Act." So, and Senator Dunn, if some of you may know him, he was the state senator from Columbia County and one of the sweetest, nicest men I've ever met. And I walked down to his office and knocked on the door, and I said, "Senator Dunn, I understand you know something about the Americans with Disabilities Act." And he goes, "I should. I wrote it." And I'm like, "Oh, this is good." And he said, "Well, they're being, the Woodstock 94 people are being sued right now. They're seeking an injunction to shut down the festival because they're not supplying sign language interpreters." And he goes, "They're suing under the ADA, the state of New York?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "They don't have the jurisdiction to do that.
Oh.
They don't have the right to enforce the American with Disabilities Act. There's some technical things that each state has to do in order to get that, and New York State hadn't done it yet." The ADA was pretty new at that point.
Do we know who was doing the suing?
It was the Attorney General of New York, who had just been appointed, and he was really looking to draw attention to himself because he was going to have to run for re-election at some point.
Well, that sounds familiar.
And yeah, so he was being very aggressive, and he wanted to shut the festival down when the gates were already open and the festival was going to start the next day. So Senator Dunn gave me the legal citations and a brief outline of what arguments I needed to make, and I went back to my desk and basically stayed up till 3 in the morning drafting the memorandum of law. I had a whole section. The first section, because it was a strong argument, was about the ADA. I also invoked what's called the doctrine of unclean hands, where you shouldn't sue somebody for something you're doing yourself.
Ooh.
And I stated, I was writing music reviews for Metroland in Albany at the time, and I stated I'd been to any number of shows at New York State-run venues, and I included Richard Thompson at the Egg. I always wanted to put Richard Thompson in a legal brief, so I did. And Bonnie Raitt at SPAC, and I said there were no sign language interpreters at all. So the state shouldn't be able to sue Woodstock 94 for the same, violation that they're responsible for. Someone in the firm knew a sign language interpreter and got me in touch with her. I think she was in Woodstock. And I told her on the phone what was going on, and she said, well, it's too late. You can't enforce that now. It would be professional malpractice for a sign language interpreter to show up unrehearsed. You have to rehearse. And so this would be a violation of the sign language interpreter, whatever it is, ethics. They just can't do that. And I said, could you put that into an affidavit and sign it and send it back to me? And she said, sure.
This is now Friday.
This is Thursday. This is, the sun's going down. I'm sitting there scrambling to get papers. I had to have papers in the next morning in federal court in Albany. The hearing was set for 10 o'clock. This whole thing was, incredibly compressed. The last argument, and my favorite, was that I said at least one of the performers will be performing in his native language of Senegalese. Yasser Andour, the great Afropop artist, was on the bill. And I said, a sign language interpreter for somebody singing in Senegalese will be of limited utility to the audience. And I had to throw it in there. The hearing the next day was in front of Judge Chilakas, who I had clerked for about 3 or 4 years before, and he was a friend. So I threw that in there to make him laugh, and it did. So it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning when I got everything done and everything copied, and I'm there by myself in this big office, and I went home and slept for 2 hours. Came back.
This is now Friday morning.
And so now it's Friday morning, and I come into the office and gather up all the papers, and it was probably 7:30 in the morning. Took them down to the court and dropped them off. And then we waited for the 10 o'clock hearing. They sent a senior partner to actually argue the motion, which I was glad for. The senior partner was brilliant. He's great on his feet. He's a quick study. And I'd had 2 hours sleep, and I was in no condition to make an argument in federal court. So we go into the judge's chambers. He announced that he was going to have the argument not in the courtroom, but it's just in the chambers. And this attorney for the state wheels in a wheelchair, and he's blind and I think deaf. And they announced he was going to make the legal argument in sign language. And Judge Chilakas, the judge, had a progressive disease. He was also quite disabled. At that point, he was in a wheelchair too. And he was the wrong guy to jam up like this. I mean, you could see the smoke coming out of his ears when this
sounds like an interesting show to put it together in films.
It was one of the most interesting 16 hours of my life. And so the state AG with sign language is making his argument. This other guy was reading the sign language and making the argument, and you can see the judge getting more and more angry. And he's looking at me and kind of rolling his eyes, and then our attorney Scott made his argument, and the judge said, I will make a ruling as soon as I can. And about 30 minutes later, that's all it took. 30 minutes later, we got the facts that the Attorney General's petition for an injunction was denied, and the case was dismissed on the jurisdiction grounds that the state of New York had no legal right at the time to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it's a little bit of hyperbole, but I've bragged ever since that I saved Woodstock 94.
Why is it a hyperbole? I mean, you busted your chops and you got all of this thing through. If it wasn't for your effort, it is quite conceivable that if nobody brought it up and whatever, it would have just folded. And
if they ignored it, yeah. I mean, when the Attorney General of New York State brings a lawsuit, and you're a big corporation, it's a good idea to respond somehow.
Yeah, and the point is you could, if you had time, a lot of people would have said, okay, we'll do it next month and we'll look at it and this and that. But we didn't have next month.
No,
We
no.
had- Nice work and thanks a lot. You know, if it wasn't for him, actually, if it wasn't for you, the same number of people would have showed up.
Yeah, and it would have rained. And it would have been a mess.
The rain would have been, oh, yeah. Anyhow, that's an interesting story, and I think a lot of people are going to find it very interesting, and I think you have every right to claim that you saved Woodstock, and that's what this film is going to
Well,
be.
thank you. I'll continue to do so.
Anyhow, thank you very much, and everybody, we're going to see you at the next interview. Who else? We can get somebody. Anyhow, thank you.
Thanks.